My name's Tim Kelly, and this video lecture will be a short, sweet introduction to free-form poetry. I put the term free in inverted commas for reasons which will become apparent in the course of the lecture, but before I go into any of that, I'd like to start by reading you a poem by one of my favourite poets, W.B. Yeats. This is called A Coat. I made my song a coat covered with embroideries out of old mythologies from heel to throat. But the fools caught it, wore it in the world's eyes as though they'd wrought it. Song, let them take it, for there's more enterprise in walking naked. I think this sums up a certain sentiment common in the world of poetry at the turn of the 20th century. Let's forget about those two parallel traditions that have informed English poetry, the thumping, alliterative rhythms of the Anglo-Saxon tradition and the complex rhyme schemes, tricky metrics and formal artifice that originated in classical Greece and that ran through Shakespeare, the later neoclassical poets and the Victorian stylists, and instead produced something honest, natural and free. Although Yeats is talking to some extent about something else, the metaphor here is appropriate. I made my song a coat. I made my poetry decorative, clever and showy. So let's cast it off, all the poetic weight of the past, and be free. There's more enterprise, more to be gained in walking naked. And here's a poem by another favourite of mine, Steve Pottinger, very much on the current circuit of performers. This is called Forgotten Hero 1. War, they said. It'll be over by Christmas. That's nice, he thought. Bleeding to death on spring bank holiday. That's nice. Notice it's simple, straightforward, in the spoken voice, and expresses a clear idea. It's free, as Yeats might have said, of any flamboyant embroidery. So, when I'm talking about free poetic forms, by free I mean the poems do not conform to the pattern of a traditional or classical type, such as the ballad, sonnet or villanelle and so forth. There's no consistent metrical pattern and no consistent rhyme scheme. Poems may feel more like prose or speech, and usually do, but just to qualify, free does not necessarily imply unstructured. So let's have a look at a couple of contemporary examples. First, another poem from Steve Pottinger, No One Likes an Angry Poet.
Next Tuesday, what with the weather being lousy and the nights drawing in and the rent being due, and the electricity bill hitting the floor and going through the roof at the same time, and feeling in need of a mid-morning pick-me-up to shore up my morale, I'm going to put on my rain gear, head into town, walk into Starbucks and smile at the barista. She'll smile back, because it's good to smile. And I'll order a brandy mocha with an extra shot with a whirl of whipped cream and chocolate sprinkles on top, and just to get that sugar hit up and running pronto, I'll order a slab of chocolate crunch, and no, I won't be taking it away. When she sets it on the counter, I'll give her everything I have in my pockets. 16 pence in shrapnel, 3 washers, an old bus ticket, and the business card some psychic medium keeps posting through the door promising an end to all my worldly ills. How a man of such prodigious talent wasn't stopped dead in his tracks the instant he smashed into the I don't think so sunshine wall of scepticism just inside the front gate, I'll never know, but that's another story for another day. Back in Starbucks, the barista looks puzzled. She counts up the coins, hands me back the washers and the bus ticket, slips the business card into the pocket of her jeans, smiles, and tells me I still owe her £5.74. I smile back, because no one likes an angry poet. And I take a deep breath, and I tell her that As Starbucks have paid no corporation tax on their UK profits for the past 3 years, I reckon they owe me a couple of hospitals, an old people's home and an upgrade of our creaking transport system. Minus £5.74. She goes to get the manager. I take a slurp of mocha and a big bite of chocolate crunch to keep ahead of the game, and when he arrives and asks, "What's going on?" and knowing no one likes an angry poet, I give him a big chocolatey grin and explain about the tax. Then, before he can whip it away, I take another gulp of mocha, grab the rest of the chocolate crunch and stuff it in my gob. He threatens to call the police. There's a long pause. Partly because my mouth's so full of chocolates I can barely speak, but mainly because my response, when it comes, is going to be so densely packed with fury and expletives that we can't let it loose till well after the watershed, accompanied by some kind of warning. Because all this smiling is hard work. And yeah, no one likes an angry poet, but I'm a poet who loves words, loves people, and believes some things are worth getting angry about. And if you can't see the difference between those two, then I probably lost you soon after I put my rain gear on back at the start. And this is my poem. And in my poem, the customers who've been in here with me, chatting, reading, sheltering from the rain, they stand as one. The baristas, tired of working on their feet all day, throw their aprons to the floor, seize the takings and march out of the door. We go from branch to branch, all through town, filling the streets, emptying the tills into a large sack, which we deliver to the nurses up at A&E. We hand out lattes to bus drivers, fire espresso and carrot cake into the mouths of homeless people, give panini to the unemployed. Coffee mugs in hand, chocolate smeared across our faces, fired up by our belief that we're all in this together, and that an injury to one is an injury to all. We storm Vodafone HQ and Amazon UK for a quiet chat about the money they owe us. And as the winter sun breaks through the clouds and the windows of the city are a seamless wall of gold, I look round, one poet in a sea of millions. God, we're smiling.
Now, I like this poem, as when it was written a few years ago, it was dealing with a thoroughly contemporary phenomenon, corporate tax dodging, alas, still all too relevant today. But although it contains an element of fantasy, the actual campaign against Starbucks was surprisingly enough successful, fueled by the anger shared across the community, and not just by this one poet. There's still the battle to be fought against the likes of Amazon, Google, Facebook and Instagram and so on, but that will be your battle. But what I like about the poem is not just the fantastic victory, with the people taking up the fight and the workers throwing off their chains, nor just the moral imperative to show who the real thieves are, but the fact it's written with simple and colloquial words in an almost natural speaking voice. And here's one by our very own Alison Morris, The String You Can Play Without.
Okay, this one is The String You Can Play Without by Alison Morris. Like notes on your guitar, you play me with a strum or a flick, once or twice a heartfelt pick that sometimes breaks a string. It hangs there, barely missed. Your notes aren't for me. Those lyrics swim overseas or lurk in a soulless place of a clung-to romance you won't face, I won't face. I think I'm there, in frets, in curved wood, in your songs. I think you play my tune, but you lament something else. Graveyard loves. Loves preserved in words, in wood, forever resurrected, directed by you like a sculpture carved for the dead, for those you no longer hold, so you hold me instead. I begin to feel the ghosts you embalm, I breathe your wounded refrains, and I watch your broken string dangling and waving as I'm played to an end.
And what I like about this is the imagery and symbolism, the musical metaphors running through it. The broken string, a symbol of disharmony, of a relationship gone wrong, of a relationship unfulfilled, as the you in the poem still clings to an earlier relationship, also broken. So it's a sad little poem, but a lovely one. Again, I'd call this freeform poetry, but it's clearly structured around a musical metaphor. Now I'm going to skip back a bit to some of the origins of freeforms, primarily in France and in the USA. So I'll say something briefly about prose poetry, imagist poems and free verse, though I'm not going to cover them here in any great depth. This will be more of a tiny taster of past poets and movements. Firstly, to prose poetry. Well, in order to answer the question, what is a prose poem, at the risk of stating the obvious, I'll just say first what prose is. And that is simply what we think of as normal writing. That is writing presented in sentences and paragraphs. And a prose poem is poetry presented in prose form, in normal sentences if you like, but with enhanced figurative and emotive language. In other words, prose with poetic qualities. Famous early exponents include Baudelaire, Rimbaud and Wilde, but we also have contemporary poets such as Charles Simish who write prose poetry. And prose poetry had something of a resurgence at the turn of the 21st century. And there's a journal of prose poetry as well as lots of stuff on the web. Okay, so here's a statement from the French poet Charles Baudelaire, which can act as a kind of manifesto of the prose poem. Who amongst us has not dreamt, in moments of ambition, of the miracle of a poetic prose, musical without rhythm and rhyme, supple and staccato enough to adapt to the lyrical stirrings of the soul, the undulation of dreams and sudden leaps of consciousness? Now, Baudelaire was thought of at the time of being a very bad man. He was a flaneur, wandering the urban landscape, getting drunk, taking drugs and sleeping with prostitutes. Here's a passage of prose poetry that gives you a flavour of the man and poet and of prose poetry. This is called Be Drunk. You have to be always drunk. That's all there is to it. It's the only way. So as not to feel the horrible burden of time that breaks your back and bends you to the earth, you have to be continually drunk. But on what? Wine, poetry or virtue, as you wish, but be drunk. And if sometimes on the steps of a palace or the green grass of a ditch, in the mournful solitude of your room, you wake again, drunkenness already diminishing or gone, ask the wind, the wave, the star, the bird, the clock, everything that is flying, everything that is groaning, everything that is rolling, everything that is singing, everything that is speaking. Ask what time it is, and wind, wave, star, bird, clock will answer you. It is time to be drunk. So as not to be the martyred slaves of time, be drunk, be continually drunk, on wine, on poetry, or on virtue, as you wish. What's remarkable about this is not so much the attempt to shock in the use of the imperative, or the collocation of virtue and drunkenness, but in the sheer enthusiasm, joy and pace of the language. Ask the wind, the wave, the star, the bird, the clock, and the lovely excess of repetition and variance, everything that is flying, everything that is groaning, everything that is rolling, everything that is singing, everything that is speaking. I think you can see This is prose that poetry is spinning out of. And this is one of Baudelaire's contemporaries, Rimbaud. I'll read you an extract from his poem Childhood. That idle, black eyes and yellow mop, without parents or court, nobler than Mexican and Flemish fables. His domain, insolent azure and verdure, runs over beaches called by shipless waves, names ferociously Greek, Slav, Celt. At the border of the forest, dream flowers tinkle, flash and flare, the girl with orange lips, knees crossed in the clear flood that gushes from the fields, nakedness shaded, traversed, dressed by rainbow, flora, sea. Ladies who stroll on terraces adjacent to the sea, baby girls and giantesses, superb blacks in the verdigris moss, jewels upright on the rich ground of groves and little thawed gardens, young mothers and big sisters with eyes full of pilgrimages, sultanas, princesses tyrannical of costume and carriage, little foreign misses and young ladies gently unhappy. Rimbaud wrote most of his poetry at a young age. This was written before he was 20. And as with Baudelaire, it's the sheer delight in language that's most striking. The rich colours, azure and verdure, not simply blue and green, anthropomorphized and energized by their insolence. And there's the literalization of metaphor, eyes are full of pilgrimages, and the transitory states that represent dream and poetic imagination. So this is prose poetry at its finest, prose that's rich in colours, symbols, metaphors. And these 19th century French poets had an influence on later movements, one of which I'll mention now. In 1913, the American poet Ezra Pound wrote a manifesto for Imagism, which included 3 key tenets. There should be direct treatment of the thing, whether subjective or objective. To use absolutely no word that does not contribute to the presentation. I think there's nothing particularly new or novel in these 2 statements, and certainly the second statement would be good standard advice for any writer. But what I find most interesting is the third tenet. As regarding rhythm, to compose in sequence of the musical phrase, not in sequence of the metronome. So it's a refusal of those thumping iambics that have come down through the ballad and sonnet tradition of English poetry, and instead to find something more lyrical, something looser and freer. Let's take a look at one of Pound's poems, The Encounter. All the while they were talking the new morality, her eyes explored me. And when I arose to go, her fingers were like the tissue of a Japanese paper napkin. What I like about this is the vital erotic charge beneath the social situation. You can imagine the scene, a gathering involving the spouting of intellectual verbiage, disguising the real encounter of her eyes exploring him. And then we have this stunning simile comparing her fingers to the tissue of a Japanese paper napkin, something fragile, delicate, beautiful. This really is a direct treatment of the thing, of the image taking over the poem and becoming the final focus. And it also fits with Pound's idea that no word should be wasted. Think how much is compacted in this short poem, how much of the scene is implied but left unsaid. And of course it has completely abandoned the beat of traditional English poetry. And here's a very famous poem by one of the key Imagist writers, William Carlos Williams. It's called The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. Now the obvious and immediate cerebral response to this is what? What depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens? And why does so much depend upon this? On a literal level, it makes no sense. But on a poetic level, on an imagist level, the success of the poem is dependent on the placement of the red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. That is on the division of poetic lines to set these direct, powerful visual images against each other, to juxtapose the colours and textures to create what is probably the perfect imagist poem. A poem which not only gives a vibrant image of the thing itself, but reflects in its form upon the nature of imagist poetry. So in other words, it's the poem that depends upon the images. No thumping rhythm here, no rhyme, just the power of the image. I'm going to move on now to a term you are likely to come across in relation to free-form poetry, and that is free verse. I'll just say that this is a very general term and used quite liberally. And whilst I'm going to talk about a couple of American poets here, to some extent it has its origins in the vers libre of earlier French poets. However, there is one outstanding early American exponent, and that is Walt Whitman. Now, Whitman is sometimes thought of as the father of free verse, and indeed of American poetry. And being an outsider, enthusiast, libertarian, wildman, Democrat, and a racist, probably encompassed many of the traits and contradictions that made up and perhaps still make up the USA. Add that various claims have been made about his sexuality, from promiscuous womanizer with 6 illegitimate children to gay icon and lover of many men. Oscar Wilde claimed to have kissed him. Then the complications and contradictions become still more marked. What is certain, however, is that his poetry has been central to the American tradition, and he was celebrated by later poets as the great poet of free verse. Anyhow, here's an excerpt from I Sing the Body Electric from his famous volume, Leaves of Grass. Hair, bosom, hips, bend of legs, negligent falling hands, all diffused, mine too diffused. Ebb stung by the flow and flow stung by the ebb, love flesh swelling and deliciously aching. Limitless limpid jets of love, hot and enormous, quivering jelly of love, white blow and delirious juice. Bridegroom night of love, working surely and softly into the prostrate dawn, undulating into the willing and yielding day, lost in the cleave of the clasping and sweet-fleshed day. This passage is obviously bursting with sexuality, and it's these long run-on lines with their use of repetitive phrases, with inversions and variations, ebb stung by the flow and flow stung by the ebb, the alliteration, hair, hips, hands, limitless limpid love, and consonants lost in the cleave of the clasp, that if not a clear structuring principle, is somewhere beyond a mere feature of the poetry, and which acted as an inspiration and to some extent a model for the work of much later Beat Generation poets of the 1950s and 60s. And I think you find that most strongly in the work of Allen Ginsberg. I don't have time here to explore the work of the Beat Generation, who were so instrumental in developing a new phase in American poetry and prose, and who were part of that countercultural force that fed into the hippie movement, the sex, drugs and rock and roll culture of the 60s, and the anti-war movement and liberation struggles that were part of that era. So I'll just mention a few of the big names that you can go and explore yourself. So William S. Burroughs, Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg are probably the best known of the group. I'm sure you're all familiar with, or at least have heard of, Burroughs' novel Naked Lunch and Kerouac's On the Road, and these two writers were best known for their prose fiction. In the poetic arena, it's probably Ginsberg's work that was most important, and you can see the influence of Whitman in Ginsberg's notorious poem Howl. And although I'm not going to go into any detail about Howl now, and though it's thought of as hallucinatory epic free verse, it clearly has a structuring principle. And although free verse is often thought of as somehow unstructured, somehow free, I'd re-emphasise that whilst it may be free from the regular metrics and end rhymes common to much traditional English verse, it's often highly structured. As T.S. Eliot said, no verse is free if you want to do a good job. And I want you to listen to a poem, or is it two poems, to show just how incredibly tightly structured free verse can be. And this poem, Howl, is read in two different ways by the author. The first time across, the second time down.
Okay, this is Howl by Alison Morris. Falling. I feel like Alice, apathetic. My head fades like a Cheshire cat with a stupid grin. The Mad Hatter laughs. Down the hole with Alice. It's not like I didn't expect it. I'm attractive debris. Again I laugh in bits. A hideous duchess. An idiotic consistency. Again, it's not like I didn't expect it. A stupid repetition, so my mother says. Alice keeps falling. She has to stop. Falling. Everyone likes Alice. It's dark down here. He ran away, the White Rabbit. It was loneliness. Expected, I guess. He said that's why he came back again. And I laugh. The Queen joins in. Off with his head. Funny ha-ha. Never again, I say. The Mad Hatter is howling now. Everyone laughs. The White Rabbit joins in. Am I a mouse with a sad long tail? My cat head's disappearing. Looking through glass. He's stolen my tarts. He is guilty. I'm talking gibberish. Drink me. There's hope. I can be tall. Become another. He will be a baby, turning into a pig. Or maybe the griffin, dismissive. I'm outraged. It's unfair. Never again, I say. Reject those orange feline grins. I shall give my tarts to someone else. There are too many mock turtles anyway. Caterpillars have the right idea. Alternative reality is needed. Alice isn't stupid, just a dreamer. Alice, get out of that hole. Okay, this is Howl, read slightly differently, read downwards, down the columns rather than across. Some say it's a different meaning. Falling. I feel like Alice. My head fades like a Cheshire cat. The Mad Hatter laughs. It's not like I didn't expect it. Again I laugh in bits. An idiotic consistency. A stupid repetition. Alice keeps falling. Falling. Everyone likes Alice. He ran away, the White Rabbit. Expected, I guess, and I laugh. The Queen joins in. Never again, I say. Everyone laughs. Am I a mouse with a sad long tail, looking through glass? I'm talking gibberish. There's hope. I could be tall. He will be a baby, or maybe the griffin, dismissive. It's unfair. Never again, I say. I shall give my tarts to someone else. Caterpillars have the right idea. Alice isn't stupid, just a dreamer. Apathetic? With a stupid grin? Down the hole with Alice. I'm attractive debris. A hideous duchess. Again, it's not like I didn't expect it. So my mother says. She has to stop. It's dark down here. It was loneliness. He said that's why he came back again. Off with his head. Funny ha-ha. The Mad Hatter is howling now. The White Rabbit joins in. My cat head's disappearing. He's stolen my tarts. He is guilty. Drink me. Become another. Turning into a pig. I'm outraged. Reject those orange feline grins. There are too many mock turtles anyway. Alternative reality is needed. Alice, get out of that hole.
And here's one of mine that starts off with an iambic beat but soon breaks down into a metered free verse. It's called Gravedigger. You dug your spade into my heart and dug again and dug once more. You sliced and chopped and pulled out roots and even stuck your foot in once to get out a really stubborn bit that wouldn't let go. And when you'd heaped the shovelfuls into a pile and we were staring down at the black hole you dug, you told me, get inside. And so I did. And you chucked the pile on top of me, the broken bits of heart and rib, and patted down the sorry mess and buried me. And if you've had enough of this lecture now, I'll finish with another of my poems, whose message you'll no doubt empathise with. All the shiting little details, form-filling flabbergastery, bureaucratica scatacica excretia. They call it mendokusai in Japanese. I'd express it with my fist or teeth, chew a corpse and up the bones. Yum. Who sucked all pleasure out of life? Ah, the window. The open window, air thick with summer scents and sultry girls' sex swaying through the park. I stab an angry finger at the off button. I can't be arsed with this.